When you think about business continuity and disaster recovery, also known as BCDR, one of the very first things that comes to mind is how do you assure that you're protected from an unforeseen outage that may render your business offline? Luckily, here at Veeam, we have a concept known as the DataLab, which enables quite a few capabilities within our product, SureBackup being one of them. SureBackup takes verifying your backup data one step further beyond the basic CRC check to assure that the machines will not only boot up properly, but applications initialize and start properly where they respond to things like ping testing and heartbeat checking. Once we've verified the VM is truly recoverable, we then power it down and provide you a detailed audit trail report so that you have documentation with date and timestamps of everything that you're verifying, which can also come in very handy if you're ever in an audit situation. Let's take a look inside the lab at exactly how you configure SureBackup and what options are available. Okay, now that we're in the lab, let's explore exactly how you set up and use SureBackup. The first thing to understand is if we navigate under the Backup Infrastructure tab and locate the SureBackup section, there's a few prerequisites that you're going to have to assure are already in place before you can take advantage of SureBackup. The first one and the foundational component is the virtual lab. The second is what's known as an application group, which deals with dependencies, such as an Active Directory domain controller for authentication, DNS, potentially DHCP services, and things like this. If one of the workloads that you want to run a SureBackup verification check against is dependent on something else like a domain controller, the application group is where you set up those dependencies. And then finally, the SureBackup job itself, which is what we're going to be discussing in this video. Now, for additional tutorials on how to deploy and configure the virtual lab, as well as the application group, we've already recorded videos for both of those topics that you can locate on Veeam.com under the Learn section. Now, to get started, you need to locate the SureBackup ribbon button in the top bar, or you can simply right-click and select SureBackup. Now, in our case, we already have one created, so if we edit this and take a look at the settings, the first thing you need to do is give the job a name and/or description, just like any other. The second step is choosing which virtual lab you're going to use for this particular SureBackup verification check. You're not limited to a single virtual lab. You can deploy multiple virtual labs at multiple sites in different infrastructures if you want, so it is important that you specify which one you want to leverage. The application group, like we mentioned a moment ago, deals with dependencies. So if you need to select an application group, this is where you would select that choice. Now, again, you don't have to select an application group, but if you do have workloads that are dependent on other things like AD authentication, you would need to make sure that you select the application group in the job first. Now, the checkbox that you see here at the bottom is the determining factor on whether or not you're going to use this particular SureBackup job for the on-demand sandbox functionality or just to do a typical SureBackup verification check. And let me explain the difference. When you're doing a typical SureBackup job and you do not select this checkbox, Veeam is going to go through and power on the virtual machines that you specify. We're going to do that inside the virtual lab, which is a quarantined, isolated network, so that you don't get any conflicts with production, such as IP or DNS issues. But once we're done, we're going to shut everything down and clean up. And we're going to provide you a detailed audit trail report that shows with date and timestamps everything we verified to ensure true recoverability. That's the typical use case of a SureBackup job. However, if you want to use it to treat it like an on-demand sandbox for testing, for patching, for upgrades, for training simulations, DevOps, application development, you name it, you can check this box to leave the application group running after the job completes, which means everything is going to work the exact same all the way up until we're done with our verification checks. And by verification checks, we can do a ping test, we can do a heartbeat check, and even run custom scripts against certain applications to assure that services have initialized properly and are responding the way they're expected to respond in production. Okay? Now, if we go to the next tab, this is where you can link the SureBackup job to existing jobs. So for an example, if we wanted to verify every VM that our regular production backup job had inside it, then we can simply link it to that particular job. Now you see here at the bottom, you can specify how many VMs you want to process concurrently for your SureBackup verification checks. You can limit this to 1 or go up if you've got a lot of horsepower and resources available. It really depends on what your environment can handle. Now, the other important thing to note is notice when we link this to the production backup job. If we did not select an application group and we simply linked this to a job, we're going to power on the VMs in order, however many at a time you specify, and try to do the verification checks. But as I've mentioned a couple times already, if you had a dependency on any of those VMs in that production backup job that needed to talk to a domain controller, or needed DNS resolution, or needed DHCP IP allocations, etc. So it's important that you build an application group with whatever primary machine that dependent VMs will try to reach out to, such as AD authentication, as a simple example. So we have a domain controller. Now, the way that this SureBackup job is going to work, if you've got an application group listed as well as linked jobs, is it's first going to start whatever is in the application group, get all that running and leave it online. Then we go through and check every VM that's in the linked backup job. Okay, now assuming you did not check this box to leave it running, then at the tail end of the job, we shut everything down. All the VMs in the linked jobs as well as the application group. Okay? Now, once we get past the linked jobs, the next option is additional capabilities, such as, do you want to do a file integrity scan on the actual Veeam backup file itself? Okay. Also, you can do malware scanning, and this deals with our secure restore functionality, where we can actually call to action a virus scanning solution to scan all the disks inside virtual machines. Okay, now you can enable this. You can scan the entire image, even if malware is detected early on. And you can also choose whether or not you want to skip the application group machines from this particular scan. Okay. Finally, you can send SNMP traps if you like, or specific email notifications that are not already set up at the global notification level. Meaning inside Veeam, you can already configure your SMTP server, you can set up the email recipients that you'd like to receive general notifications. But if you've got specific people that you want this particular SureBackup job to notify, you can enter that in here below, followed by semicolons if you've got more than one recipient. And that's it beyond scheduling. You simply schedule when you want this job to happen, or you can leave it in an ad hoc state, which is what we have here, where you can run it manually. Now, we've mentioned on-demand sandbox once or twice. So one of the nice things about SureBackup is you can use this to verify true recoverability of your virtual machines. And I'll give you a simple example. Let's say it's midday and Windows applies updates, or you do a patch, or you do some sort of software upgrade that requires a restart of the server. Many times you don't have that luxury during production hours, so you wait to your maintenance window. Well, what happens if Veeam backed that machine up in the pre-rebooted state? The next morning you come in, after the maintenance window happened overnight, the machine restarted, and now you've got a blue screen, or worse, a pink screen of death, or any type of registry corruption, or anything that could go wrong with updates, right? So then you go to Veeam thinking you're going to do an instant VM recovery and restore that VM very quickly, but what you forgot is if you choose the latest restore point, which was last night, when you do that initial restoration, it's the same thing as doing a reboot on the machine. So you're likely going to receive the very same issue that you saw in production. And this is the prime example of why SureBackup is so needed, because this not only verifies the blocks in the Veeam backup file doing CRC checks, this actually verifies that we can boot up the machine and it reaches a logon prompt. So essentially your operating system fully boots and fully loads. Then we take it a step further, do a ping check and a heartbeat check and even a script test to assure that services have even initialized the way they're supposed to. Then we power everything down and provide you that report, which can come in very handy if you're ever in an audit situation. Now, additionally, you can use this whole concept to provide an on-demand sandbox anytime you need to do testing and patching and DevOps and application deployments and any other use case you can come up with where you would like to have a sandbox environment. Now, the beauty of this is you're going to be testing with very close to production environment states, right? Because if you did a backup last night and you're running the sandbox the next morning, your data is only effectively 6 or 8 hours old at that point. So it's very close to the way that it looks in live production. Now, you can see this job is running. So if we look at the stats on this, you can see in my example, I'm using this job as a SQL on-demand sandbox, which means I need my domain controller for authentication, and I need, of course, my SQL server. You can see that the job goes through all the testing that we've already talked about, and then it just stops because we check that box to leave the application group running. So if you look over here on the left inside vSphere, you'll notice that inside my data lab, I have the two machines. You can see the names followed by a long UUID, so you don't get any conflicts from a naming standpoint. And you also see the Linux-based proxy appliance, which handles all the routing inside this data lab environment. So now I can truly treat this like a sandbox that's totally isolated from production. This is yet another use case on how Veeam can leverage data that you've already created, whether it's backups living on your repository in this case, or if you're using Veeam for replication, take a look at our other video on SureBackup and how you can also use your replicas to power a sandbox functionality, which will yield you better performance when you're leveraging the sandbox, because you're not going to be pulling from deduped and compressed backup files any longer. Instead, you're actually going to be driving that sandbox from fully hydrated VMs that already live on production data stores in your vSphere environment. So much better performance. Thank you very much for watching this video, and for more great tutorials and how-to videos, make sure to check out Veeam.com and locate the Learn section. Thanks so much for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.